The marks I carry on my body are those of Jesus Christ. St. Paul speaks these words in our second reading today. Many of the early Christians were significantly persecuted. And Paul was treated during his life as a Christian quite badly. He was taken from prison to prison. He was beaten at different times. And he was bruised. And for many Christians, that was their story as well in the early church. Paul, even before he became a Christian, was inflicting some of those bruises upon the early Christians. And the early Christians could very easily have become bitter by the experiences of living the Christian life. Almost like to think that the world is against them and that they've got something to sort of be, to almost have a hatred towards the world, a hatred towards all people. The Roman Empire, the Jewish people, the list goes on. There was lots of people the Christians could have been angry with. But Paul and the other early Christians, they don't give up on proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Even though they had bruises on their bodies, cuts and other things, and Paul eventually has his head chopped off, he continues to stay joyful. In our readings today, the first reading and the psalm remind us to be people of joy. You look at the Old Testament, and the Jewish people are seeking joy. But you look at the history of the Jewish people in the Old Testament, and they have disaster after disaster, war after destruction. It's not always good for them. And sometimes they can become negative. But very often, the role of the prophet and the role of then the Christian is to remind us to be joyful. Let all the earth cry out to God with joy. In the midst of disaster, we're called to be joyful. In the midst of a great storm, we're called to be joyful. In the midst of a pandemic, we're called to be joyful. And the characteristic that we should be known for is not groaning about how bad have we got it? How difficult is life? Oh, my bruises, they're terrible. How are your bruises? No. What Paul reminds us is that we're called to be people of joy. Yes, we carry the marks of Christ. The marks of Christ on the cross are carried in each of us, but we also carry the marks of the resurrection. That we are redeemed people, we are saved people. And because of that, there is a reason for joy in the midst of disasters. In the midst of a storm, there is a reason to celebrate. And I think this is a message very much for our time. It was a message for the time of Paul, but it's a message for our time as well. Today as a country, we begin NAIDOC Week. Next week is a week to seek the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There are some in this country who I think want to focus so much on those bruises of the past, those injuries, to refer to events like Invasion Day, which is emphasising the bruising as opposed to the joy and the peace of welcome. And that's what the gospel is reminding us today, that whenever we go to a place, we're called to bring peace. When we go into somebody's home, we're called to bring peace. And in bringing peace, there is an exchange of welcome. Unfortunately, I think when the English came here to settle, they didn't recognise this was anybody's home. There wasn't a great war, there wasn't a great invasion, as some people like to make it out. The English had this idea of terra nullius. It's nobody's land, so we'll just take it. And so they never even came in to say hello and to say, yes, we come bringing peace. And I think that's part of the challenge of the history of our country and perhaps for the history of the Indigenous people. But I think as Christians, we are people of joy. We are known for being people who bring peace, who bring welcome, who receive welcome and give welcome in the midst of even disasters. And that's where I think our readings are asking us today. Jesus sends out his missionaries not to bring war, not to remind the world how bad they've been to us. St. Paul reminds those early Christians, and Jesus, when he sends out his missionaries, he says, go bringing peace. Even when you've been hurt over and over again, bring peace. And that's the message that needs to be reminded to all of us as we head into NAIDOC week. Yes, we have moments of our past that are terrible, but we look to the future with joy, with peace, and with welcome. Welcome to the stranger, welcome to the one who's there already, welcome to all people. That's the way of Jesus. That's really the way of this country. That's the way of the people who've lived here for thousands of years. And that's the way of God. The marks I carry on my body are those of Jesus Christ. Let's not just see the marks of Paul on his body and the marks that we have as the whips, the scars. But let us know the marks that are upon us are the marks that have been placed there by the sacraments, by the anointing that was placed upon us when we were christened, the water that was poured over us when we were baptised, the oil, again, that's used at confirmation and at the anointing of the sick, and the Holy Communion we receive when we come to communion. These are the marks that are on us, the mark of Jesus Christ living in us. Let's go into our world to bring joy, not negativity. And when we see or hear negativity about the things of the past, let's not be people who just stay on Good Friday. Let's also be the people of the resurrection, the people who bring Jesus Christ to our world with joy. Let all the earth cry out to God